Um, Hi, everyone. I like to extend a warm welcome to this Korea Institute presentation series, Korean Treasures at Harvard. Thank you very much for attending. I am Harvard Yenching Professor of Korean History at the Department of East Asian Languages and Civilizations. And also this spring only, interim director of Korea Institute, while Professor Nicholas Harkness is on his sabbatical leave. I'm very happy to continue to offer this series this semester. I believe we did not offer any last fall when we had many other amazing Korea Institute events. Before introducing our speaker today, I have a few announcements. Today's event is supported by the Jeffrey D. and Jean K. Lee Fund at the Harvard Institute, at the Korea Institute, Harvard University. And please save all your questions for the Q&A session at the end. If you'd like to ask a question, then you need to type your name and affiliation in a private chat message to KI Chair, which is myself. Lastly, this event is being recorded and will be later uploaded to Korea Institute Vimeo channel. We already have more than a dozen collections there. If you missed any, or if you'd like to watch some again, please visit the website. And our staff will share the link with you through chat. Last year, we were very fortunate to have Dr. So-Young Lee, Chief Curator of Harvard Art Museums, to introduce us a general overview of Harvard Art Museum's Korea collection. And today, we will look at our Korea collection more up close, the ceramics, goldsmithing, and Buddhist art of Korea's Three Kingdoms period in particular. Today's speaker is Dr. Sarah Laursen, who is the Alan J. Dworsky Curator of Chinese Art at the Harvard Art Museums. She oversees the Chinese art collection as well as parts of the Korean and Central, South, and Southeast Asian collections. She is a specialist in early medieval China. Her research interests include East Asian archaeology, digital humanities, technical art history, collecting history, and contemporary Asian and Asian American art. Before coming to our museum at Harvard in 2020, Dr. Laursen was a curator of Asian art at Middlebury College Museum of Art, and also assistant professor at the Department of History of Art and Architecture there. And she earned her doctoral degree from University of Pennsylvania and had a postdoctoral fellowship at the Institute for the Study of the Ancient World at New York University. After her move to Harvard, she curated a number of exhibitions, including Earthly Delights, 6,000 Years of Asian Ceramics, and most recently in the fall of 2023, Objects of Addiction, Opium Empire, and the Chinese Art Trade. The title of today's presentation is Recentering Korea at the Harvard Art Museums. So please welcome Dr. Sarah Laursen.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, Dr. Kim. And thank you to the Korea Institute for the generous invitation to speak to you this afternoon. As was mentioned before, I joined the Harvard Art Museums in 2020 as the curator of Chinese art, overseeing the Chinese collection, but also parts of the Korean, Central, South, and Southeast Asian collections. So my own area of expertise is actually in early medieval Chinese art and the Xianbei people of Northeast China. But there are intriguing overlaps between the archaeology of that region and the Three Kingdoms period Korea, which has led me to take a strong interest in Korean art since graduate school. I've been fortunate to work with the Harvard Art Museum's extraordinary Korean collections alongside Chief Curator So-Young Lee and other colleagues in the Division of Asian and Ancient Mediterranean Art. My talk today is in 4 parts. I'll begin with my curatorial approach and why I feel Korea merits more attention and visibility than it has sometimes received in the past. Next, I'll introduce our Korean collection at the Harvard Art Museums, from its modest beginnings to the current scope, which is quite large. From there, I'll provide an overview of some of the ways that works have been highlighted in the galleries since the museums reopened in 2021. And finally, I'd like to share with you some upcoming changes in the permanent galleries, the reasoning behind those changes, and some ideas about the future of the collection and its display. Before I jump in, I want to clarify why it is so important that Asian art, and specifically Korean art, be prominently displayed at our museums. In 2018, the American Alliance of Museums published the findings of a working group tasked with creating a shared vision to guide museum professionals in their work on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion. They wrote, quote, "Our institution's viability and sustainability depends largely on our ability to be relevant, magnetic, and inclusive." I agree wholeheartedly with these ideas and have long believed that our museums should reflect the diversity of our community, both at the university and beyond. So what does our community look like? Let's consider some statistics. In the United States, 5.9% of the population identified as Asian American or Pacific Islander. Among them, Korean Americans are the 5th largest AAPI group. In addition, the most recent studies put international Korean student populations in the US at almost 41,000. At Harvard, there are no specific statistics available for students of Korean descent, but the class of 2027, which was admitted last fall, is 29.9% Asian American, the largest proportion in the university's history. Now more than ever, we need to reflect the diversity and vibrancy of our community on the walls of our institution. And yet, only 4.1% of all the Asian art currently on view, and that's less than 1% of all art on view in the museum, is Korean. And I think that we can do better. Today, a number of Korean institutions are generously promoting Korean art internationally, and to great effect. In 2012, the National Museum of Korea inaugurated the Museum Network Fellowship. This 2-week program brings together doctoral students and postdoctoral researchers to gain field experience through comprehensive lectures on Korean art, museum visits, and field trips to heritage sites around Korea. For myself and many others, this was a first chance to engage deeply with Korean art. When I came out of college, there really were no programs in Korean art. There were very few curators of Korean art and museums throughout the US. The Korea Foundation has also funded Korea-related exhibitions and endowed curatorships at museums all over the world. They've also provided support for educational programs like the 2022 Korean Art Week, which was in part hosted by Korea Institute. These initiatives are making Korean art more accessible to broad audiences and training the next generation of specialists. While Korean art was not taught at Harvard in its earliest days, we're fortunate to have a collection that was begun more than a century ago, when our Asian holdings were still in the old Fogg Museum pictured here, which was established in 1895 on the north side of Harvard Yard. Here, art theory professor Denman Ross displayed a rotating selection of Asian artworks he had personally collected. These included the objects seen here, like the painting depicting books, flowers, and antiquities, which is in the so-called Ross corridor seen in the photo on the left. A second painting given by Ross, a portrait of an official, is currently on view in the University Study Gallery on the 3rd floor of the museum. In 1927, the new Fogg Museum was opened at its current location at 32 Quincy Street. In November of 1931, an exhibition was held to honor a young Hervey Wetzel, a student of Ross who had died quite young, leaving his collection and his fortune to the Fogg. In the foreground of this photo of the exhibition, we can see bronze spoons, a typical funerary furnishing in Koryo tombs of the 10th to 14th centuries. Over the next 40 years, Korean acquisition slowed somewhat, but the most remarkable items among them that came from Harvard alumnus Grenville Winthrop. In his bequest of over 4,000 objects, he included this Koryo period water moon Avalokiteshvara painting and several gilt bronze Buddhist figures dating to the 7th to 14th centuries. In 1985, the Asian collections were transferred to a newly constructed museum at 485 Broadway. Around this time, Houghton Library's former curator of printing and graphic arts, Philip Hofer, donated a variety of books, Buddhist sutras, and other documents, as well as the funds to grow this interesting subset of the collection. Between the 1980s and the 2000s, the first Alan J. Dworsky curator of Chinese art, Bob Mowry, expanded the Korean collection through gifts and strategic purchases, particularly in ceramics, paintings, and textiles. Today, the collection contains more than 700 objects created between the 1st and 21st century, as well as an additional 700 ceramic potsherds given by David and Rita Jort in 1995. I should note that these await further study, and I'm really hoping that there's a graduate student watching right now who might be interested in writing their thesis on them. Perhaps the most transformative gift was the Henderson collection of Korean ceramics, which was exhibited at Harvard's Museum for Asian Art in 1993 and has already been introduced by So-Young Lee at a previous presentation that you can watch on the Korea Institute's Vimeo page. The collection is comprised of high-fired Three Kingdoms period stoneware, Koryo celadons, and Choson white, blue and white, and puncheong wares, among others. These were collected by Harvard alumnus Gregory Henderson and his wife, Maya Henderson, during Gregory's 2 tours in Korea with the US State Department in the 1940s to 1960s. He had studied under Langdon Warner, the Fogg's curator of what was then called the Department of Oriental Art, who taught the first Asian art courses in the country beginning in 1912. In 2014, the Asian collection was brought under one roof with the Fogg Museum and the Bush Reisinger Museum in what is now known as the Harvard Art Museums, which is at the location of the 1927 Fogg Building. In this new building, curator Melissa Moy oversaw the installation of the Korean collection in the later East Asian galleries on the 2nd floor. Because of the light sensitivity of paintings and other organic media, the works in this gallery, known to us at the museums as 2600, they're fully or partially changed every 6 months. This space underwent a major renovation shortly before 2020. And here, the Chinese and Korean art are commingled in one space, while Japanese art occupies an adjacent space. This unusual structure is not a geopolitical statement. It merely reflects the traditional separation of curatorial responsibilities within the department. However, it does mean that Harvard does not have a single gallery dedicated to the arts of Korea, as many museums do. In spite of the extraordinary breadth and depth of the collection, when I arrived in 2020, the only Korean works on permanent view were a group of 6 Buddhist sculptures exhibited in a small case in the early Buddhist galleries on the 1st floor. Setting aside fragmentary objects like potsherds, this still represented less than 1% of the Korean collection. In contrast, closer to 5% of the Chinese collection was on display. As we prepare to reopen following the pandemic closure, my colleagues and I set out about finding additional spaces to exhibit them. In the next section, I'll highlight some ways that Korean art has been brought out for 6-month rotations as well as longer-term displays. The first intervention was initiated by So-Young Lee, who selected a group of Korean ceramics, mainly celadons and earth-tone puncheong wares, to display on the arcade or balcony on the 2nd floor. Ceramics are not light sensitive, which makes them ideal for display in areas with direct sunlight. In 2021, I curated the rotation Picturing the Lives of Women with postdoctoral fellow Yuhua Ding, who's now assistant curator at Wellesley College, as well as with So-Young Lee. The Chinese, Korean, and other works in this gallery were selected to highlight the struggles and achievements of women in Asia, particularly under the influence of Confucianism. Many of these objects were gifted by or in honor of women, purchased with funds provided by women, or made by female artists. The case on the far wall featured ceramics with floral motifs, which often carried metaphorical meanings connected to women. One of the most important works in this case, for me, was a large bowl decorated with a peony that was made by Nami Kim Wagner, who is a creative and enthusiastic practitioner of the ceramic arts and a beloved teacher and director of Harvard's Korean language program until 1995. As exemplified by this work, she was deeply inspired by Korea's puncheong wares. Wagner's carving through the white slip is typical, but the splash of blue pooled in the glaze at the center represents her own artistic expression achieved through experimentation. She wrote, quote, "I discovered my own voice as well as my roots by exploring puncheong. I wanted to express respect, admiration, and love for the ancient potters by approaching my work with their same free spirit," end quote. The artist herself had a chance to visit her work in the museum shortly before she passed away at the age of 99 last year. Here we also highlighted in the center of the far wall a decorative cloth known as a pochagi, usually made from silk, rami, or hemp. Popular in the Joseon dynasty, these were used for everyday purposes like wrapping food or gifts or storing bedding. Patchwork types like this were originally stitched from scraps of discarded garments. Segregated from men in the home and isolated from each other, Joseon women turned to activities like sewing pochagi as a creative outlet and an avenue for communicating good wishes to friends and loved ones. In the next rotation, we celebrated the 40th anniversary of the Korea Institute with some of the most important and popular Korean art in the Harvard Art Museum's collections. This installation was co-curated with graduate student intern Sung-hee Oh, who is now assistant curator of Chinese art at the Art Institute of Chicago. Here we celebrated celadons of the Koryo dynasty. Unlike the opaque glaze of Chinese celadons, the transparent Koryo glaze reveals decoration underneath, whether it's inlaid, incised, carved, or mold impressed. The distinctive Korean inlaid celadon techniques involves carving a design into the surface of the clay body and filling the recesses with a contrasting color of slip before it is covered in glaze. We also featured three of the most iconic types of Korean objects. The storage jar on the right, popularly known as a moon jar for its evocative shape, was produced at the official court kilns in the 17th and 18th centuries. Unadorned porcelain reflected the restrained aesthetic ideals of Neo-Confucian elites in Joseon, Korea. To create such a large spherical piece, two bowl-shaped halves were wheel-thrown and joined together, resulting in a slightly irregular contour and perceptible seam along the middle. These distinctive objects have been admired for centuries for their natural and unpretentious qualities. In the center is another pochagi, and on the left is a chekuri screen, a unique Korean genre of still life painting defined by an assemblage of objects prized by Confucian scholars, such as thread-bound books, bronze incense burners, ceramic tea sets, flower vases, and fruit bowls. Early Korean paintings of this type were notable for their use of Western techniques like realism and illusory perspective. And I'll just note, this pochagi was actually very popular at the museum, and it was featured in a poster for a student late night event. And it was the most popular poster and can now be found all over the offices of the Harvard Art Museums. So if you stop by, you'll definitely see this again. On the far wall, on loan to the museums and making their public debut were four delightful works by the renowned modern painter Kim Hwang-ki, which were the subject of a talk by graduate student intern Sana Cha. To their left is a porcelain memorial plaque, which offers insights into the lives of aristocratic members of Joseon society. Based on the title inscribed on its side, this plaque is from a set of 4 made for Lady Pak of Panam, who died at age 39. Composed by her older brother, the epitaph honors the deceased by highlighting Lady Pak's virtue. One achromatic wall includes a monumental peak by contemporary artist He Suyang, which is surmounted by a whimsical bicycle. It's complemented by ceramics of white, gray, and black hues, which were produced over the course of a millennium. And the final wall features a portrait of a scholar official dressed in informal Confucian scholar's attire. Portraits like this one were widely produced in the Choson dynasty to convey a scholar official's humble yet noble disposition, and they contrasted with more formal portraits. To his left is a man's brimmed hat made from lacquered horsehair over a bamboo frame, and to the right is a pair of paintings depicting plum trees with spring blossoms that have been attributed to Cho Hui-ryong, a well-known poet, painter, and calligrapher. The later Buddhist gallery next door highlighted the realms of heaven and hell, in which Buddhist cosmology constitute 2 of the 6 realms of existence. In these realms, people can be reborn as divinities, demigods, humans, animals, hungry ghosts, or hell dwellers. But what form they take depends on how virtuous they were in their previous lives. This frontispiece depicts the Buddha Vairochana in heaven, flanked by bodhisattvas and other attendants. As a meritorious act, imperial family members and aristocrats employed the best artists and best materials to create these lavish texts to present to a deity. The best known Korean sutras on indigo-dyed paper with gold and silver inks date to the Koryo period. Displayed in the main part of the Buddhist gallery are images of hell. Sung Hee-oh noted in her labels that after the 10th century, hell was largely understood as a bureaucracy administered by 10 kingly magistrates, whose clerks meted out the appropriate punishments to souls who appeared before them. Monumental images of the 10 kings of hell were widely used to incite fear and instill the importance of leading a pious life. The second painting from the right, seen here, depicts the first king and is an exceptionally rare example of one from the Koryo dynasty. Please visit the Harvard Art Museum's Vimeo page to see Sung-hee's wonderful introduction to these works. A broad array of Korean ceramics were also showcased in the exhibition Earthly Delights, 6,000 Years of Asian Ceramics in the University Study Gallery during the summer of 2022. Here, the rarely exhibited large Korean vessels and stands from the Henderson collection took center stage. Other selections highlighted the international tradition of blue and white wares and dragon wares. An auspicious symbol, the dragon was a popular motif on Korean and Chinese ceramics and was often associated with royalty. The 3 large vessels on the lower right shelf of the left photo, 2 in cobalt blue and 1 in iron brown, exemplify this quintessential Korean dragon jar, with the beast presented both as a majestic creature and as a comical one. In the photo on the right, a group of subtly varied hues of white exemplifies the diversity and elegance of white wares from China, Korea, and Japan. Returning to Gallery 2600, Art by the Book was curated by Yuhua Ding and elucidated the impact of woodblock printed painting manuals from China on the arts of East Asia. These manuals explain the basic principles and specific techniques, such as brushwork and composition. And from the 17th century onward, they were exported to Japan and Korea, where they were reprinted and provided models for local painters, as well as artists working in other media, such as ceramics. Ding observed that the Korean painting here contains a conventional image of the scholar leaning against a rock that derives from a Song dynasty landscape prototype. A version of them can also be found in the 1679 Mustard Seed Garden Manual of Painting pictured on the left side. Last fall, the Korean ceramics on the arcade were brought into Gallery 2600 in combination with some new pieces. And these are going to remain in place for at least a couple of years, after which a new grouping will likely replace them. And you can see we have also brought back Nami Kim Wagner's wonderful bowl here as well. The blue and white dragon jar made another appearance in an installation called Human versus Nature, which examined the ingenious and detrimental ways that people have extracted resources from the earth and minimized its unpredictability through science, technology, and supplication to higher powers. This wall considered how cobalt, extracted from the earth, has been used differently in Chinese, Vietnamese, and Korean traditions. A table case in front of it considers artists' materials derived from animals. This storage box, for example, was probably used to store men's clothing in an elite home and is made from lacquered wood inlaid with mother of pearl, shark or ray skin, and wire. In fact, there's also a small amount of tortoise shell, which we didn't recognize initially, that's in the center top of the box. Mother of pearl reached new heights during the Koryo dynasty, and shark or ray skin, which is also referred to as shagreen, has a textured surface whose toughness and grip made it a very popular material for boxes. Next door, a painting of Alms Bowl Pond in the Diamond Mountains by Kim Hong-do, which So-Young Lee has discussed in one of her Korean Treasures talks, demonstrated the strong connections between Buddhist painting and the natural environment. The works in the current installation in 2600, entitled Journeys, embody travels that are real and imagined, temporary and permanent, voluntary and involuntary. They're painted in progressive time-based works like hand scrolls and as static snapshots that invite the viewer to complete the trek in their minds. Among them are two Korean paintings, the first of which is a six-paneled screen depicting famous Chinese recluses who literally or mentally abandoned their demanding careers and the comforts of the city to take up residence in the mountains, where they felt they were able to express themselves more authentically. And the second, on the far wall on the left, depicts a recluse seated among trees playing a seven-stringed zither, a quiet plucked instrument whose origins reach back at least 3,000 years. The zither was a leisurely pastime for educated elites, and it was played either alone or in an intimate group as a demonstration of the player's self-cultivation. There are also some charming details, like the teapot positioned near the tree. But I want to return now to the two images we began with, because I'd like to tell you about some changes we'll soon be seeing in the galleries. The first is a decision to bring Korean ceramics into the overwhelmingly Chinese first floor Asian galleries in a rather dramatic way. In this photo, we're looking through Gallery 1740, which holds Chinese jades, bronzes, and early ceramics, and into another gallery that contains Chinese ceramics and other grave goods. The ceramic horse you see here has been moved into the courtyard, as you might have noticed, to make way for the temporary installation of a gold sphere by the Mexican artist Bosco Sodi. When the spheres are removed, that one will be replaced by a Korean ceramic vessel, bringing attention to the mounded burials of the ancient Three Kingdoms period, as well as the distinctive openwork stoneware ceramics that they contained. We will literally recenter Korea by placing the stand seen here in a position of prominence, visible from the courtyard. In the future, we may add one more case containing smaller Three Kingdoms ceramics from the Henderson collection. As we make these changes, we'll also better contextualize Korean bronze and gilt bronze Buddhist figures, which are seen here on the rear wall, by integrating them with other early Buddhist works throughout the ancient world. The new installation we're developing will bring a group of early South and Central Asian Buddhist figures from an inset case around the corner into the same or onto the same wall as the Chinese, Korean, and possibly Japanese objects. The later Chinese, Korean, and other gilt bronzes will move upstairs into an inset case in the later Buddhist gallery, which will expand that gallery's coverage beyond China, Japan, and Thailand to also include Korea, Nepal, and Pakistan. So moving more works from more places into more new spaces. The new installation downstairs will contain a map demonstrating the transmission of Buddhism across Asia, and will show, for example, how Central Asian prototypes impacted Chinese bronzes, and how Korea transformed Buddhist iconography received from Six Dynasties China, creating important new forms like the pensive bodhisattva seen here, that it would later pass on to Japan. This year, the South and Central Asian works removed from this inset case in the doorway between the first two Asian galleries on the first floor will initially be installed with stucco sculpture from Afghanistan that's being studied now by two visiting curators from the Kabul Museum. However, after a year or so, they will be replaced by a group of gold and silver objects and grave goods from China and Korea. This change will provide an opportunity to display for the very first time this 6th century gold earring from Shilla, one of Korea's three kingdoms. Shilla society was divided according to the bone rank system, with two royal classes and three additional aristocratic classes below them. Interestingly, bone rank was a greater prerequisite for power than gender. Women could be shamans or rulers as long as they were of the right class. Consequently, we cannot make assumptions about the gender of tomb occupants who wore jewelry like these earrings. The materials and construction techniques of crowns, belts, and jewelry were indicators of elite stature and would only have been worn by royalty. Silver and gilt bronze were worn by lower social strata. This earring closely resembles multiple examples from Tomb 151 at Hwangnam-ni in Gyeongju, and given the entirely gold material, it must have belonged to one of the uppermost echelons of Shilla society. Shilla's gold working was unmatched by any other culture in Asia. In this detailed image, we can see the masterful use of beaded wire to line each of the delicate gold leaves suspended from the polyhedral bead below the hoop and ring. Although small, this never-before-seen earring will undoubtedly attract the attention of museum visitors and raise awareness about Shilla culture, about the Three Kingdoms period, and about Korea. Finally, as we look ahead, we're also thinking about ways that contemporary art can be brought into dialogue with the traditional components of our collection. Last year, following an exhibition of his work at the Korea Institute, the Harvard Art Museums purchased this large-scale painting by the inventive artist Park Dae-sung. In addition, these two vessels that play with the iconic form of the moon jar will be on view starting March 1st in the special exhibition Future-Minded: New Works in the Collection, which runs through July 21st. I hope that you will come visit us soon and experience the Korean art collections at Harvard. Thank you very much for your attention.